Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Monero Meet, the month of December 2020, where it's great to have you on. Always fun things happening in the Monero community. At the moment, you're on with me, Justin. You're also on with Lee and Arctic Mine. Lee, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
So I'm Lee. I go by VT Nerd on the forums, the GitHub, and the IRC. So I'm Lee. So I've been contributing to Monero project for a few years now, and so more recently I've been funded by the community to continue various optimization, pretty much anything that needs to be done in the core client, along with I guess Moon out there with background.
Very cool. Thank you, Lee. Arctic Mine.
My name is Francisco. I go by Arctic Mine in the forums and on Reddit. Lately, I've been working on the fee and the scaling aspects of Monero. In fact, I may have a fair amount to say on fees fairly recently. And so that's been quite interesting. Also, looking at some of the compliance stuff. So there we go. I've been around for since 2014 or something with Monero. We'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Awesome. I mean, a ton of things have been happening in the Monero community. Lots of exciting things, right? The Monero price, for one, the past few days has been pretty all right, to say the least. It's always fun going to bed and I'm like, oh, well, 12%, not too bad. So that's always some fun news going on. But also tons of other things happening in the area of compliance, in the area of Dandelion plus, which I know we'll have Lee, talk about later today. But just to set the stage for people who are joining the Monero Meet for the first time, perhaps, this is an interactive session. It is your chance to ask us questions. We are here to participate and answer. So make this as much your time as it is ours. But first, it looks like, is that Need Money 90 who just joined?
Definitely not. It's totally and it's early. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. We are not blessed with your
It's 10 a.m.
your appearance this time.
Yeah, it's too early right now. I just woke up. Maybe in a bit if I wake up a bit. But yeah, no, I'm a mess right now. Good morning.
Good morning. It's basically,
Good morning.
This should actually be called the Monero Community Alarm Clock for Need Money 90 is really what it should be. I think that's a more descriptive title. You can see I just made my way out of the shower recently. So, yeah. Anyway, I think we'll get started. It looks like Lee, or maybe a little bit quiet. If there's any way for you to bump that, you're max on my side. Otherwise, I guess it'll be a little bit quiet.
Yeah, hold on. Let me.
Arctic Mine, what were the biggest things that happened in the Monero community for you in the past month?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, the big one, of course, is there's a lot more discussion now on fees and scaling, in particular with respect to some of the concerns of a possible attack, some discussion about increasing the ring size. I think there's legitimate concerns with respect of the low fee, which I've been taking a very close look at. And to make a long story short, my opinion is that it's simply too low, and it also will become impossible to scale at that fee anyway, should we have an increase in adoption about twice to three times our current level. So it's not, I think, out of the question to change the fee structure. So that's one of the major things that I've been seeing. It was mostly from observing comments from a lot of the developers, also in the community, combined with the concerns around potential attacks. So that element has been a big one. The other question, of course, I think is a really interesting one, is whether or not we should consider increasing the ring size. Now, it would, and this again is an interesting question. There is a good argument for doing that, particularly with after CLSAG. And the idea would be to get to a level of to a transaction size comparable to what we had before CLSAG, which is also where things like Arcturus and Cryptech are going to come in. So if we are going to look at any both of those two protocols, you're looking about 2,600 bytes to into our transactions in that range. It could make sense to raise our ring size to a transaction size of that level, and then make a transition to Arcturus or Triptych being more straightforward. So that's the other question I've been looking at. And then, of course, there's the related question of issue 70, which is fairly old. I mean, it's been there since February of this year. And the concern there is about fee stability. And there's a very legitimate issue that was raised there. And quite interestingly, what an impact of something like COVID-19 would have been, which in fact, if you look at some of the economic disruptions that COVID-19 created over the last 10 months, it's actually a lot of what the concerns that were raised there are very legitimate. So that's kind of the areas that I've been sort of looking at right now lately, primarily. And on top of that, I have looked at some of the compliance questions. So that's kind of where...
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff happening.
Yeah, it's a lot happening, yeah.
Before we move on to the whole Bulletproofs Plus stuff, because I know there's obviously, sorry, not Bullet, Dandelion Plus stuff. Let's start on the, Bulletproofs Plus, the Triptych, the scaling and ring size discussion. So I can't remember the exact time that the Bulletproofs Plus proposal was moved to funding, but the Bulletproofs Plus has been funded. Sarang is already partially through it. And in the Monero Research Lab channel, he published some preemptive results just as a draft before it goes up as a release. But ultimately, transactions are about 5% smaller, and they're also about 8% more efficient to batch verify, which is really, really important. The signing is faster too, but that's effectively irrelevant because it's already milliseconds anyway. So transactions already, whether we move to Triptych or not, are already going to get about 5 to 10% more efficient on top of all the efficiency gains we've already had. And so we could argue that, perhaps that's a reason to, meet the gap with a higher ring size. But I think more importantly for ring size increases, people are looking to like Triptych to bump it up to like 64 or 128 as being the most realistic implementation numbers. Would you agree with that, Arctic Mine, or anyone else in the call that, we might bump it like 1 or 2 or something in the short term, but really we need Triptych to get it any higher than what it really is at the moment?
Not necessarily. I mean, there is a sort of a sweet spot, maybe a sweet spot in the 20 range. And that's about twice where we are right now. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Triptych is going to take it up to 64, 128, even higher. But if you look at the Triptych curve versus the CLSAC curve, there's a sort of intersection point. And that's kind of where we could move CLSAC to. That's what I'm saying. So if we were to go in and say double the ring size, and this is where we've got to crunch the numbers and figure out exactly what something like that's going to come in, then you end up with a transaction size where Triptych is going to come in with a ring size somewhere maybe 1.5 to 2.5 what we have right now. So it's not insignificant, but it is actually definitely an option. Now, the other thing to watch is this. If we move the reference transaction size, which I didn't actually do it when CLSAC came in, didn't recommend that, and I'd be really have mixed feelings about it, to say 2,000 bytes, then we're going to have to bump it back up again if Arcturus or Triptych comes on stream. And the reason being is because, again, this is sweet spot about 2,600 bytes. I'm getting 2,800 bytes for Triptych transactions. It's in the Triptych paper where the CLSAC intersects with Triptych, and that'll give you some an idea what I'm talking about. Now, the trouble is, if you want to be backwards compatible in a reasonable fashion, then to move back up again, then you have to increase the penalty-free size. So there's a lot to be said for keeping the penalty-free size at 300,000 bytes until Triptych Arcturus comes online, and then deciding, well, okay, now we have some room to raise the ring size, and yeah, maybe we can go to a 20 or somewhere in that range. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So there is definitely, I think, an opportunity with CLSAC to move not a significant amount, but definitely not to a 64 or 128 or anything like that. So that's kind of where I'm in the middle here. Personally, after seeing some of the concerns, I think there is a case if this can be done in that size range to do that, to have the sort of interim step. in there. So definitely, I think that is an option. So no, I wouldn't be thinking we're going to 13 or something like that. No, I'm thinking more somewhere in the range of.
Okay.
19
Yeah,
or
it'll
21.
be interesting to run some of the numbers to see what specific protections those provide. It definitely would provide more protections in like the 65 to 80% dish output compromised range, I'd say, is what you're really targeting there.
Well, I think part of the problem also is that if you look, say, 50% attack, is that you have a distribution curve. And this is also a variant of what you were discussing with mining outputs. And so if you look at that distribution, well, if you double the ring size, for example, you make the distribution narrower. So it's not just that you need twice you're going from, say, 20 to 10 in number of fakes, but the distribution is a lot narrower. And so that edge spot is also impacted. So there is definitely a benefit once you start moving that far out. So it's not, that I think is fairly straightforward. I mean, the more the question is, you're effectively doubling the verification time, which that could be a concern. But again, you're going to ask the question, when we went to ring size 11, that was the introduction of bulletproofs, basically. And that was just optimized to get the 3,000, just under 3,000 for the bytes for the transaction size. And it's proven out to be actually very good. Then we've had all these other incremental improvements, later one of which is actually Bulletproof Plus. And, there's still room, that's what I'm saying, if we wanted to go that route. The other way, yeah, we could stay where we are and just basically leave the reference transaction of 3,000 bytes. Is that fine? Because it will work fine too. We can do that also. So that's definitely an option. But like I said, I'm a bit reluctant of moving that reference transaction size down, because then to move it back up again, then we're going to have to increase the penalty-free zone. That's just my thoughts about the whole thing. So.
Okay, well, thanks, Arctic Mine. I think I'm going to switch topics here just so we can keep it nice and fresh. But if we have time, we can loop back around to transaction fees, because I agree with you at the moment. They're at least like a fifth, if not more, than they really should be. So, Lee, I'm going to switch it over to the Dandelion.
Wait,
Dandelion
can I interrupt? Did we talk about the number going up yet?
We did a tiny bit. If you want, you can take the floor. We have XMR Trader Mod here. I know he's been distracted with some video games in the moment, but it's fine.
Cyberpunk 2077 definitely did not just come out, and my moderation has not been slacking for the past couple days. How dare you?
Find that quote and link it to everyone else here real quick while you talk about the price. I'll be doing that.
So XMR Trader, actually, to speak about actual important stuff, we recently adopted a change in rules where people can post technical analysis on the front page now. Previously, we had rules against that, and then I had a community poll, and the majority of people actually wanted them on the front page. So we're doing that now, and I have misgivings, but this is what the people want, so we're doing it. And ever since then, the price has spiked, so maybe that was a good idea.
It was all thanks to you.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'd like to thank the community in this case, because they're the ones who pushed me to make the rule change.
I've given up trying to predict the short-term price of Monero. I mean, long-term fundamentals fine, but the short-term behavior, that's beyond me.
It only goes up, except when it goes up in reverse.
Yeah, that's
reverse.
That's the critical thinking we like to instill in the Monero community. Really lead by example by saying the price always goes up no matter what, including the cases where it goes down.
It doesn't do anything else. Monero only goes up.
So. But actually, interestingly enough, the question of price does come in, of course, in the question of fees and how you scale them. So that's another interesting question, because is it going to go quadratically or linearly or somewhere in between?
We've had a jump in price, and then people will complain about fees, but it's because the price in terms of dollars and other fiat went up suddenly.
Well, I mean, it's the fee in real terms, or sort of in purchasing power that people really look at.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, no one cares about the actual in-unit fee. They only care about the price in USD. That's just the reality. That's the real expenses to span the network or whatever, all in USD, and most people think in USD. So there you go. All right. Well, Lee, Dandelion in the chat, I put the link to Seth's article that is a summary of the situation. That's a good place to start.
Oh.
But Lee is.
Was this his? Oh, I probably read this already. I thought you want me to comment on that, or
No. I want you to comment on like what happened with Monero and Dandelion what has been happening over the last several months. Why had people's transactions taken so long to make their way to get verified, and what is the Monero community? What have you done to help mitigate a lot of these challenges that the Monero network has seen over the past month?
Right. Which I'm sorry, which chat did you put? I think I've seen what was that his blog post that he put together?
It was. Here, let me include that in OBS.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've gone through that. So, but there was something in there that yeah, it was suppose not to be unexpected. The difficulty with Dandelion and this was known from beginning, was that it possibly enabled an attacker to temporarily disrupt transactions being posted to the mempool. So this is a result of Dandelion would typically, or not typically, it picks one outgoing connection to send the transaction, and then that person will do the same. And so it's chained together for an unknown number of hops. It's based on probabilities. And so each node sort of independently selects whether they're going to forward the transaction to one peer or whether they're going to send it to every peer. So if an attacker gets a transaction when it's just being sent through this first phase, where it's only being sent to one peer, they can temporarily disrupt the transaction from appearing in sort of everyone's node, everyone's memory pool. The other frustrating thing is that the attacker can see this. So unfortunately, the protocol works is when you send out a transaction, it says this is during the anonymity phase. This is during the privacy phase. So the attacker knows when it receives it, if the prior node is being honest, basically the attacker is the only one that's responsible for then forwarding the transaction to one peer or to many peers. So what happened was there was a number of different things that were working against us. One was that we had set a pretty aggressive anonymity phase. So the probability was such that each node had a 10% chance of forwarding it to everyone. So this meant that the chain, so to speak, from your node to when it ultimately got broadcast to everyone was was based on probabilities, but it was most likely going to be around 10 hops before everyone on the network would see it. So this first issue meant that this increased the attackers' chances of sort of black holing it, because that meant there was 10 hops. There was quite a bit of opportunities to intercept the transaction. And I guess I'll have to circle back around to that in a second after I discuss these other properties. The other thing that we ran into, which was a bug that I went unnoticed, and I feel bad about this one, is that it was only checking the memory pool every 2 minutes. So if one of those honest nodes had a timeout at, say, 3 minutes, it may not get triggered for an additional 2 minutes because of this bug. So this is why people were seeing on the typically around 5 minutes. In fact, the average should have been probably around 4 minutes or so, which was beyond the expected timeout, again, because of this bug where it was checking too infrequently in the memory pool to see if it should be timed out and forwarded to everyone and assumed to be sort of attacked. And so the combination of, and the reason why the timeout was so long was because of these parameters we had selected. When having a length of 10, we had pretty aggressively set it to hide. The Dandelion paper pointed out that if you're not careful, you have too short of a timeout, the attacker can sort of determine the chain that it went through a little bit, especially over time, because there'll be a bias toward the earlier nodes when they time out. So they have this long timeout to sort of mask um, the sort of chain order of these of the hops that's going through. So we changed the probability to 20%, which was the minimum suggested in the paper. This reduced the transaction hops to about 5 on average. This meant that we could lower the timeouts to 39 seconds. And it also meant that by fixing the 2-minute bug, it would actually be forwarded typically under a minute now. So we went from probably, when the attacker managed to trigger this, it went from somewhere around 4 to 5 minutes to probably less than a minute before your transaction would appear. So that right away helped. The other thing was, because we lowered the number of hops before forwarding to everyone, the attacker then had a lower probability of intercepting this transaction as it was flowing. And there were also a couple other, I think, bugs that Xiphon had found out and corrected about. So there's certain cases where the node cannot relay transactions, particularly if it's catching up to the network. It does not relay because it doesn't know whether a double spend is occurring. So we fixed a couple of these issues, which meant that they were no longer, I guess we'd call them what do you call that? Like self-owns, where we were sort of black holing due to a bug. We also shortened a lot of these timeouts. And so if the attacker is still creating, so what they were typically doing is creating tons of connections, maybe not tons of nodes, but tons of connections. But again, though, it was kind of weird how they had to do it. In fact, Moo also posted a pretty interesting, this last release would really help with that. The attacker was also sending out a very large peer list. So the way these peer-to-peer networks works is your peers will say, here's everyone that I know about. So the attacker was sending a very large table where it had a strong bias toward its own nodes, its own sort of hidden nodes, and it would typically use the same IP on different ports. So we're using a bunch of different techniques that we could sort of mitigate against, actually, that we had never really come across because it wasn't that huge. So although we typically we were banning by IP, we just weren't tracking it as we were assuming that possibly 2 ports on the same IP was 2 different people due to some NAT situation, which could happen on like old cell networks at this point. It's probably the only one that it really happens on at this point. So I mean, I'm kind of throwing a lot of these techniques, but there was like sort of a lot of small changes we had to make, and none of them. The only one that really impacted privacy per se was probably the lowering of the chain length, the stem phase. But again, though, that was still within the bounds of the recommendations by the paper, and so I don't know. The claims, I think, by the attacker and how much they're able to see is sort of unknown. And it's going to get more difficult because we're sort of more aggressively filtering out these various techniques that the attacker was doing to make it appear like there are multiple nodes. And so I guess to clarify, the reason why the attacker was creating multiple ports and sending these large peer lists was we were only forwarding transactions to outgoing peers. The idea being, in the Dandelion++ paper, this prevented the attacker from saying, okay, I want to know what this IP is doing, and filling up all of your incoming connections. So the paper recommended only forwarding transactions to outgoing during the first phase. And this is why the attacker then had spent various techniques to aggressively sort of infiltrate, if you will, the outgoing connections list. I mean, the interesting benefit to the Monero community is that it actually hardened the Monero's privacy Dandelion++ almost immediately. So I mean, we went from, like I said, like a year ago, to having none of this to having like much more real world tested code. So but yeah, let me look through Seth's paper because I think I covered most of whatever he said. I think I pretty much covered everything that he. The only thing I guess technically we don't really know. The attacker claimed that he was doing this, but I don't know that we definitively know whether it was a person I mean, what I'm saying is anyone could have claimed it. I don't know that we've actually identified who was actually doing it, because this was coming from um, the nodes were running on there we go. They're running on DigitalOcean and OVH. So they're running on sort of well-known rentable CPUs. So exactly who was doing this? I guess OVH and DigitalOcean may know the identity, but we just have to sort of assume that the person claiming to be the attacker is the attacker.
So would it be possible to say, or reasonable to say, that the failure case of the Dandelion usage is somewhere equivalent to literally not using Dandelion at all, and not worse?
Correct. So this is something they pointed out in the paper. So in the worst case, you end up forwarding it directly, like your node is the original or the origin, and you forward it directly to an attacker who then black holes it. In that case, what's interesting, so that's probably like the worst case. What's interesting, the attacker doesn't really know. They know that you're somewhere in the chain. They just don't know whether you're the first one or not, unless they somehow think that they've sucked up every one of your incoming connections or whatever. So there is some wiggle room there. What you could say could develop. I guess what I'm saying is, because there's a flag in there saying that's part of the stem phase, it does ruin the thought process a little bit, the statistics a little bit, because you know that it happened during the stem phase, so you know it has to be near the origin. You just don't necessarily know what part of and that's part of what the timeout is for. By having an extended timeout, it makes it more complicated on whether that was the first hop or whether that was, because if you say, okay, within 5 seconds we're gonna send out a flood, the attacker then knows, okay, I saw this, and then immediately 5 seconds later it went out. Okay, so this has to be the origin. So that's sort of like why there's a longer timeout, in case people are curious why there's this somewhat extended timeout. So I'm not I guess what I'm saying is I'm not really comfortable saying that it devolves into identically the same. Now I do want to point out, I guess this would be a good point to point out, we actually switched how that phase works too. Years ago, Bitcoin changed how they were doing it to something called, they now call it, I guess, the paper calls it fluff mode, but there's also another name for it. I'm forgetting it now. Every connection is now randomized with a short exponential timer to sort of obfuscate the transaction flow. So again, a year ago, we were doing it the original Bitcoin way, and the Bitcoin programmers, along with other people, changed it. And so we're now mimicking that behavior too. So, yeah, I guess one thing is I really don't know, because of that first phase. The attacker knows that it's near the origin in the worst case. But the thing is, I don't think they can assume that you're the origin. So that's sort of what and a lot of the paper goes over that. They actually ran a model. They actually simulated this network where they were actually simulating, okay, what if we knew the connections between nodes? What if we didn't know the connections between nodes? And all these different probabilities. And so this is how they came up with their final algorithm on that. And so all it's really doing is making the statistics a little bit harder. So if the attacker has something like, it's something weird, like if the attacker knows every connection, the attacker knows the entire connection graph, but they only have like 20% of the connections in the network, they have a pretty good idea of how the transaction flowed, simply because they can sort of determine statistically based on which one of those links they saw it first on, where it originated from. But then when you do anything at all with Dandelion related, it messes with that a little bit, primarily because you don't know that stem phase at all. It's sort of really, so yeah, and there's different analysis, basically whether the attacker knows the connection graph or not. Meaning they know the internal connections of the whole network, which is another, it probably doesn't, but yeah, I'm sorry not to really answer your question, Need Money, but I really don't have a great answer for that. My guess is that it's probably no worse, but
Yeah, Yeah, that's about what I gathered from the situation as well, and I think that that's kind of a good point to point at.
Right.
Like
Like
if
the network was like not set up for private distribution of the broadcast before. So
this
Oh,
is
m-
literally not worse than nothing. It can't be worse than nothing, even in a complete failure case. I mean, you
Well,
could black hole TXs.
the one thing that I'm not sure about now is we randomize the transaction broadcast because it messes with their ability to identify the network graph, but we don't do this for block relays. So I have to then I've been wondering about this myself, whether if that's a source of identifying the connection graph, which is a so basically if the attacker knows a connection graph, that helps as well. It doesn't make it terrible with Dandelion++. It just adds to their ability to trace things. So yeah, but certainly we went from like nothing like a year ago, no mitigations at all, just sort of like identical to early Bitcoin to we've leapfrogged them probably. So
and I have another question, and this has got to do with IPv4 versus IPv6, because
yeah.
it seems to me that the scarcity of IPv4 addresses has a critical issue here from both the attackers and the defense perspective, and the use of ports to try to simulate multiple IP addresses. So, if you have any thoughts on IPv4 versus IPv6, I mean, that's the real kind of on this issue.
Yeah. So one of the things that we saw the attacker doing was Moo found out, he must have noticed this in his local table. The attacker was claiming IPv6, but there's a technique where you can take your IPv4 and put it into an IPv6 address. For those who don't know, the difference is IPv6 is 128-bit addresses where IPv4 is 32-bit. So you can have, it's called IPv4 in IPv6. So the attacker appeared to be doing this because we would ban the IPv4 address, but not the associated IPv6 address. And then if you accepted IPv6 addresses, you could still connect to it, even though it was technically an IPv4. So there was all this, there's a bunch of shenanigans like that. So yes, one of the mitigations that people have recommended for peer-to-peer networks and civil attacks in general is using the IPv4 scarce resource as a means to make it difficult for the attacker to do a civil attack. So what we do now is we basically filter out by class 16, meaning if you have the first 16 bits of an IP address, if they're identical, we try to choose another address if possible. One of the things that someone had posted they're going to try to do, we'll see how well it works out in practice, is identify the autonomous networks, meaning identify the actual like, is this AT&T network? Is this, whatever France Telecom network, with the idea of then spreading it out that way. Bitcoin is doing something similar. They're doing a little more advanced. I don't know that we want to do quite what they're doing. But yeah, you can use that. The counter argument, though, is IPv6 is inevitable because IPv4 is running out of addresses. So, but again, this is also why I2B and Tor have issues with denial of service stuff and other Sybil attacks, because you have an even larger address space. You have typically at least 256-bit address space, so you can just keep generating new addresses, and yeah, it's the same headache. Actually, it's even worse than that because a lot of IPv6 addresses aren't technically publicly valid.
So am I to understand that IPv6 poses a greater risk than IPv4?
Correct. Yes, this is usually what pretty much every academic paper has said, and I don't think anybody has really argued otherwise. Because like with IPv6, you can get something crazy like, I don't even know. I mean, it was like insane. Like you could get like 50-bit addresses, or I mean, you could just get a ton of addresses. So it was really hard to track. Yeah, we might be able to do something similar if you could identify what networked IPv6 addresses were associated with, but then your table lookup would be huge, possibly, right? Because yeah, I don't know. You just sort of go in circles. But yes, almost every academic paper says IPv4 is safer. So I would say you can disable IPv6. So if that's a concern to you, maybe that's what you're going to do for now, and then wait until other mitigations are detected. But that would be one way to reduce this particular risk of Dandelion++ attacker stuff.
Is IPv6 disabled by default?
But
I believe it actually is, but maybe Arctic Mind could tell you.
But the flip side of it is that if you increase the number of addresses, the connections that you have, then of course it's much harder for the attacker to try to isolate a node or nodes.
Well, I mean, you can increase the number of connections, but just say no IPv6. But I guess you're saying perhaps there'd be more nodes at their IPv6?
What I'm saying is that if each node has more connections, it would mitigate the attack. It should mitigate the attack. So, for example, even on an existing an IPv4 network, if you simply go from opening the port that allows you then to have like 100 connections rather than 8, that would mitigate the attack against that particular node. And so if you have a network like IPv6, that opens the opportunity to do that sort of thing, to maximize the number of connections that you have. So you would actually, the honest node could also have a large number of connections going out. So that's the flip side of it that I can see here.
Well, correct. I think we also need to really, I think you didn't say this directly, but we need to promote people accepting incoming connections because it helps with the privacy.
Well, that's exactly my point. That if you do that, but you're not just opening the incoming connections, but you're also creating more connections for yourself. Because the minute you accept incoming connections, and then what happens is you have more outgoing connections. It's harder to attack a node.
Right, because especially if they're symmetrical, right, you'll get more peerless and more opportunities to see more of the network, right? Yeah, there's also
that's basically what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly. So if you increase your incoming connections, then you have a much more, and so if the honest node then becomes harder to attack by simply opening itself up.
Right. Although I think we should choose a different language because that somehow sounds so bad. But yeah,
that's exactly what you're doing. You're actually opening
it
and effectively increasing your. It's counterintuitive, but in fact, that's what you're doing. By opening a port, you're actually mitigating against this attack by opening the ability of others to connect to you.
The other mitigation that Moo did, I think, after the first 17.0 release was that the number of outgoing default connections was moved from 8 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
And this was also to make the Sybil attacks harder. And also, we didn't even discuss the 2-block or the sync issues that the attacker was pulling on everybody. So that was another fun one.
That's the other one that I had a question about, actually.
Just because that conversation had gone on for a while.
Yeah.
Right, did you have the last point there?
Me? No.
Oh, okay. Well, apparently I just have been interrupted at the right time then. But yeah, the 2-block sync issue is another exciting attack for another time, but glad that there are mitigations at this point. All right. Well, on a different note, like Monero has had RandomX implemented for over a year, which means we've now had over a year without a proof of work change. Woohoo! Woohoo! No more last minute changes that were very hellish. Does anyone miss those? Anyone miss everyone's?
No, I was the one doing them, so no. That was it was like 72 hours. Find a change. Okay.
But didn't someone take a bunch of CPUs and put it in a box that looks like an ASIC?
Oh, yeah. There's someone put a bunch of like server grade CPUs just like in a big box together, and they're selling it. And people were discussing some of the efficiencies, and they're like, yeah, probably doesn't really make the most. It's like it's not the most efficient, but it's still like a high hash rate. So like, what are you gonna do at scale? So
yeah, I don't know, but the memory, there'd be a memory bottleneck, wouldn't there?
No, like they literally like bought just a bunch of like Xeon CPUs that are old and just like shoved them in a box together. So they're just selling like a box of like 100 of these things.
Oh, but so it's not actually like you buy it and it's ready to mine. You're just getting CPUs and then you have to figure out what to do with them.
You're literally just buying like it's like a bunch of like literal Xeon CPUs that have not been modified except just to be close together in a box, and you just buy like a bunch of them at a time, and that's what they're calling a Monero ASIC at the moment.
What, does it? I mean, do you actually have to buy like a motherboard after that? Like, how does?
I think it comes with I think it's like just a bunch of the chips with the motherboards just crammed together.
It looked to me like the Minimus motherboard, which is what you'd want to do to mine Monero anyway, with a bunch of these motherboards put together with CPUs on it, in a box that if you looked at it sort of on a website, oh, this looks like an ASIC with fans on both ends, and you know.
But it's interesting because almost anybody can put that together, though. That doesn't. Because you're just taking, for the most part. I mean, the trickiest part is getting like some sort of custom case, which is not too complicated.
No, you use an ASIC case.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You take an old-fashioned Monero, an obsolete Bitcoin ASIC. You take a case, they consider it, you put the CPUs in there, and then you sell it as a Monero ASIC.
You've heard of egg cartons before, right? Remember everyone used to use those?
What'd you say? Egg cartons?
Yeah, the egg cart. Well, like the boxes. Not were they milk cartons? I don't actually remember. There were some the whatever the rectangular.
Oh, the milk cartons.
Milk cartons. Okay.
For mining?
Yeah, they use those to like suspend a bunch of the GPU cards on. Not really.
Oh, okay, right. Okay. That's like, oh man. Well, that sounds like a fire hazard.
Yeah.
Is that why there's all these videos of just charred out mining operations where it's like, well, I don't know.
You know, I would say most people didn't have very high standards back in like 2012.
Hey, they're like, hey man, look at that hash rate. I don't care, man.
Yeah, it's like the room might be 1,000 degrees. It might be literally on fire. Actually, I did build one Monero mining rig back in 2016 when the 470 cards just came out, and those kind of have been in a box for a while. It hasn't been mining Monero, obviously, so just been like sitting in my parents' basement. And my dad had brought up the cards, turn it on, and one of the cards just started smoking instantaneously. So that was the end of that one.
Nice.
It seems like the motherboard shockingly did not break, despite one of my power supplies charring a little bit, and so I had to replace that. And
was there poor heat? Was there poor ventilation? Is that how this was occurring?
I don't think so. I just think.
I assume that that it started smoking because you had dust that was.
Right.
That would be my theory. A combination of maybe poor ventilation, dust, and a couple of fans that didn't work very well. That'll do it. And then hanging sub, and then you get the smoke out of it. That's a possible guess. But
yeah, dust is a silent killer on computers.
Yeah, that's
just starting a mini fire in a living room, and everyone going like shit, and then of course, since it's an open rig, there's no like actual power button. You have to like reach in there with like.
Oh man.
Yeah, you have to connect
power
two
button
pins together.
Wait, a power button, is that what you call pulling the power cable from the back?
Yeah, but like you're panicking in the moment, so like you're trying to reach in there with the screwdriver. But yeah, pulling.
How many computers have you set on fire, Justin?
What?
You seem to have a lot of experience in setting computers on fire. I don't.
No, I can't take credit for the latter. I wasn't even there, so I just have heard the stories of people in my family doing that. But
right.
No, that was the reason I built a mining rig, was because I was in a dorm with free electricity. So like, it's kind of what else are you gonna do, right?
Yeah, I mean,
they charge me like
a
ton of money for rent anyway. So like,
well, if it's cold enough, then you have to.
I was in Minnesota. Anyway. I was in Minnesota.
There you go. It's like heating your room too.
Yeah, so you're heating the room with electricity and basically getting a rebate in Monero, even if you're paying for the electricity.
So anyway, that was a long roundabout way to get around to saying, woohoo, RandomX 1 year, still going, looks okay.
There were so many people saying it wouldn't make it this long.
Oh, there were.
People have just kind of shut up now, and I think they're just waiting for something to happen so they could be like, "Hey guys, look, it got ASIC'd," and it just hasn't.
Well, I mean, I still think the idea of taking obsolete Bitcoin ASICs, stripping the innards out of CPUs and mini motherboards inside is a.
Yeah, exactly.
You got the fans at the
new
end.
Epic CPU is an ASIC, right?
Oh, is that how you pronounce it? Oh, okay. I never really.
I assume. I don't know. I guess I've never heard someone say it. I
I
just
never thought of that. I mean, I've got 2 old original Bitcoin ASICs. That's an interesting idea. I can open the thing up.
Yeah.
And read. That is
Are they just
idea.
paperweights now? Is that what happens after?
Well, basically, unless you want to mine Frycoin or something like that. Stay warm.
Aftermarket for generating vanity Bitcoin addresses. That is definitely a utility because Bitcoin's double shot 256 on ripe MD 160, and yeah, just you can pop in the old Bitcoin ASICs and be like, hey, I want my username at the front of an address. Let's run this for a few weeks.
But then you still have the electricity charge, so you're heating your house with the thing.
And then you need to get a new address when you need to accept payments again. Come on.
But it's cheaper than a CPU. That's the point. This is ridiculously cheap in comparison to just running it on non-ASIC hardware. Do vanity.
Yeah, of course.
You know what's even cheaper is just not having a vanity address.
But
imagine having your username at the front of an address and being like, hey guys, this is my address. Everybody look, this is all public. Look at how much is in here.
Yeah, I don't. Oh, that's right. It's even worse because now everyone can see on the blockchain.
Yeah.
It's like literally embedded. Oh, man.
There are actually some exchanges that do this, so it's just kind of funny. Knowing that they're going to mark anyway, I guess.
But then you don't even have to do any. What's interesting, you don't even have to do any external lookup to know who that is because it's like,
no.
Oh, whose address is? Oh, that's obviously just this exchange, right?
That is why my vanity address is my social security number. Just keep things simple.
Smart thinking. It's like you need that meme where it's like the guy tapping his head.
Like if you're going to be traced anyway, you got to make it easy, okay?
Yeah, I get you.
Wallet and hot wallet start with cold and hot, if I remember correctly.
Indeed.
I just look at the addresses in the chain. I'm like, that's Bitfinex.
Oh, so you can pretty much just see this in real time then.
This like a lot of exchanges do that.
Can you cram a mnemonic seed into the public address?
That would be ridiculous.
I know. It would just that'd be hilarious. Keep things simple.
We even got a Bitcoin bash in today. That wasn't. Oh.
So I guess I'm going through the top of the subreddit at this point just to see what the main events happened to the month or other main events of the Monero month. The atomic
the
swap
meme subreddit or the real subreddit?
The R Monero subreddit. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Let's see. What else? Let's see. I'm also reading some of the chats that are coming in now. Oh, also one of the big things, Kraken announced a new grant program, and Monero was one of 3 cryptocurrencies that they listed by name of the ones that they wanted to support projects in. So if you are like a Monero researcher, developer, or whatever you're doing, please apply for one of those grants. They're trying to give us money. We should allow them to give us money. So let them give us money. So like if you're a Monero Moo, maybe apply for free money from Kraken.
What is the was it for research or development for anything?
For really anything. I'll put the link both here and in chat once I go to the Kraken page. But they're trying to give, like, they fund Bitcoin developers. I don't think there are really that many limitations because it's not being distributed from a C3 as far as I'm aware. So they can give people money for pretty much anything. Here, I posted that link.
They should almost just redirect that to the CCS, but I don't know if they want to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll have to see it. They might.
Because they want to approve it probably on their end manually.
Like they gave $150,000 to BTC Pay Server, for example.
Wow.
That's one they list. I thought they had another one too, but it's
But that's more of a project, like an overarching project, so they can distribute it to multiple people as opposed to
Yeah, I mean, like we can say donate to the Monero, general fund, but I think they're looking for maybe slightly more project oriented. So I don't know. Maybe the Monero core team should just reach out to them and say, hey, we have this donation address. Hello, please.
or even just
I'm,
the other wallet or something.
I'm thinking that's
Good.
going to be attractive more to a developer that does not mind being public. That will be the optimal for that. I
Right,
can see
because
somebody
Yeah.
because they want to make it public and so on and see what the project is from their perspective. So I would suggest that would make sense for a developer that is open about their they don't want to, they're not particularly private.
I did contact them on behalf of Magic, which is a 501c3 that we use to handle the fundraising for Bulletproofs Plus, because we can continue supporting, even development on open permissionless cryptocurrencies like Monero or anything else. So I haven't heard back from Kraken, so I'll have to follow up with them. But
do you know what might be interesting? The audit for something got Bulletproof Plus.
The what did you say? Sorry.
The audits on both.
Yes, we need an audit for Bulletproofs Plus, and so Magic is available for that too. It's within our mission.
Yeah, that could be the sort of thing that would work.
Oh yeah, Kraken doing that would be interesting too. We should approach
that was what I was that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, something like that is fairly has high profile. You're not hiding, where you're sending the money or anything like that. You're not having a lot of privacy involved. That would be the kind of thing that could be very interesting.
Yeah, like they could just pay the SOW, directly. Like they could just be like, okay, here we're paying the directly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. That would be, and then they could, they sponsored this thing, and there'd be a good PR for them because it's fairly visible and.
Yeah, sounds cool. Plus, then they can look. It gives them a further hand in helping relationships with their audit for whatever they need audited or whatever security testing they need anyway. So, good idea. We should. I'll speak with Serang to see how close we are to the audits. But what was that, VT Nerd?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just triggered a thought. Go ahead.
I was done. Go ahead.
One thing that you could discuss was the CipherTrace patents and what exactly, because they're trying to come in the news again. I just saw this on the Monero page, way down.
So I do have one update, not regarding CipherTrace, but regarding the IRS contract. So a few months ago, there was the news that came out that IRS had issued contracts to Chainalysis and Integra FEC for advanced traceability methods for a wide scope, right? Like it wasn't actually clear what this project was specifically focused on. Of course, the news entirely focused on traceability for Monero, which is reasonable given that most of the items were Monero focused. But it also did cover things like the Bitcoin Lightning Network and other potential scopes. So I sent a FOIA request to the IRS for the statement of work documents for these two contracts. They sent me the two contracts, but of course they redacted any of the relevant information that would be of potential use to see what they're actually working on. They considered it proprietary information. So either I need a lawyer to argue that no, this isn't actually proprietary information, this should be public information and should be disclosed with the FOIA request, or I need to try another approach, and that's for other different types of documents that would be relevant. Or at this point, I don't really have an obvious path forward unless someone knows a lawyer that is familiar with FOIA requests. For example, if you have a connection at the EFF, maybe that'd be a good person to talk to, and then I can give them, hey, this is my response. I need to argue that this is not enough info. But I did hear back. I do have those two statements of work, but there really isn't anything included there that isn't obvious, or there really isn't anything disclosed in those. The table with what they're going to work on, the entire table is just redacted. So
So CipherTrace did not get this contract. We know that much.
They
though,
did
right?
not get the contract, correct.
Hmm.
Man, so these guys seem to care about privacy only when it benefits them. Just redacting all of the information that we want.
Yeah. So yes, sadly, the statement of work information at the moment from Chainalysis and Integra FPC is not public information. So
part of the issue with this stuff, this has been one of my big concerns, is that if you want to actually have something that's very marginal, you have to sort of hide it. I mean, you are basically relying on security biosecurity to a large degree, because your security is fundamentally flawed. And with surveillance, if you are trying to give the impression of surveillance, and in fact your surveillance is maybe 60% accurate or 50% accurate or something like that, then hiding it is one way to maintain that perception. So the argument they will say is, well, if we let this information out, the bad guys will figure out how to work around it. Well, the reason the bad guys can work around it is because it's not secure.
Yeah, we didn't even get to that point. They just argued that there was proprietary information or confidential or something. They didn't even say it was like you're describing. So we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because the patent has to be public.
Oh, that one does. Yeah.
Right, but it doesn't seem like it's probably going to contain much useful information because, like Arctic Mind said, part of the advantage is not disclosing what they're doing so that they can always portray it as the worst situation, or we know everything kind of situation.
See, what we should have done with breaking Monero, which would have been a really good future funding source, was just patent the general idea of looking at a transaction graph and be like, look, patented.
You can't do that. Oh man.
But
But get like
obviously,
a database together
two
and
things. One, I don't really want to be known as a patent troll. Two, security through patent troll is not amazing anyway. And
can you patent troll the government? Is that even possible? That's like some kind
totally is possible. It's totally
in the US, yes, it is. In the US, it definitely is.
Yeah, you're right. Because you can patent like weapon technology and like, oh, government, you got to come buy it from me.
Yeah, pretty much. We made it.
Oh.
The flip side on patents, of course, is this business of getting into the question of licensing, where you take these GPLs and AGPLs and this kind of stuff, and you say, well, now you've got to release your patents and turn around and license the patents. You agree to do that if you incorporate the patents into the code. So that's another interesting area.
I'm just saying we could have been set if we patent trolled. We would have been so. All right, so it's a little after 1 Central. Are there any final things people want to get out there? I have maybe one final thing real quick on the compliance side, just to tell people new stuff is out there. But
nothing on my end.
All right. Last thing I want to end with then is, the Monero, well, not the Monero, but several different exchanges came together to create new resources called, Comply First is what it's branded as. But it's a bunch of resources on how exchanges, cryptocurrency companies, the like, can implement policies for privacy preserving cryptocurrencies and privacy preserving tools like mixers and the like. So there's a bunch of resources available there to help exchanges. And we've received a lot of positive feedback already from FinCEN, from, other exchanges saying that they found that it was very actionable. So we really hope that this, in conjunction with the Perkins-Coie paper, will give people some additional confidence in building good AML programs that can actually support Monero. Not that the current ones can't, but just they need to justify it. And hopefully this gives people the ability to justify things. And I don't think there's any significant changes really with what exchanges will ask for, but people need to know that they're comfortable. And for privacy coins, there's a general idea that people don't feel comfortable. So people need to, and hopefully this will help people out. So if you are aware of anyone that does ask questions about compliance and this sort of thing, I know it's boring, right? Compliance is kind of boring, but it is important that people are able to exchange on like easy on and off ramps. And then people can, of course, still use a DEX or whatever if they want to do that too. But, you know, exchanges are easy. So with that being said, unless there's anything else, I'm going to wrap up the Monero Meet for this month. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you back in January after the holiday season. Stay safe. You know, it might not be safe for you to go out and travel everywhere, so be very, very careful. And yeah, have a great rest of your month. And hopefully when we come back, Monero will be we'll have some other fun price conversations.
Thanks for the meet, guys.
XMR Trader will just be flooded with pages of TA every day.
Oh, please no.
All right, everyone. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Yeah, bye.